Well, thank you to the three main speakers. Wasn't that interesting? Three very, very different perspectives, but three powerfully argued positions from the three speakers. I thought it was extremely interesting indeed. What we're going to do now is, rather like the morning session, we'll take 2 or 3 contributions from people. Would you say who you are when you indicate you'd like to speak? I think that would be useful, unless, obviously, if you wish to remain anonymous, I think that's okay. If you would do that, and then, as I say, I'll take 2 or 3 questions or contributions, whatever it is you want to say, and then ask members of the panel if they'd like to respond in any way. Okay? We have a first speaker there, gentleman there.
My name's Roger Alsop, and I have an empathetic statement to make to Hassan Radwan, because I was brought up as a strict Jehovah's Witness, which I've now left, and I feel the same as him. I think somehow a little bit Jehovah's going to come and get me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And here in the front.
I'm Muriel Seltman. I would like to comment on what Aloma Sharia said about his rejoicing, and that's marvellous, because he can speak freely in this country, and I hope that this will go on indefinitely. What I would like to say is this: there's a whole group of people in this country who are not able, who accept voluntary censorship about speaking out in support of people, apostates, against ex-Muslims and so on. And those are the people who have been persuaded by a form of cultural relativism that if they speak out about Sharia law in this country or any country, they will be called racists. They will be thought of as being imperialist in some way. And they are accepting a sort of they are voluntarily locking themselves up. Now, these very people who would so hate to be called racist, who would so hate to be called imperialist, are the very people who are potentially would be our greatest allies in a campaign against Sharia in this country, and solidarity with those who want to come out as not wanting to be called Muslim anymore. And this is a terrible thing, and I would beg them, but this is no good, this is mere words, these are mere words that I'm using, beg them to walk out of the prison door, because it is not going to be, they're not racists because they want equal rights for all, but these are the people who are not speaking out. And years ago we used to say, this country and its ruling class has a brilliant method these days for making people be their own oppressors. And those people, by locking themselves in and not objecting and not speak and accepting that they mustn't speak freely, they are their own oppressors, and they are doing themselves no good, as well as not helping the movement for freedom.
Thank you. And Mariam.
Well, thank you for that. I think there's a couple of issues. One is, you mentioned that it's easy to come out. You found it quite easy to do, and I agree. I found it very easy to do as well. But I think there is a problem. Somehow it's not very easy for a lot of people. And it's not, as you said, it's not necessarily just threats and intimidations. Hassan mentioned it too. It's losing, your loved ones, or disappointing them, upsetting them. My father still keeps telling me, oh my gosh, your grandfather's turning in his grave, because he was a mullah, which I'm not supposed to say anymore because Iranians hate mullahs so much. I'm supposed to call him an Islamic scholar for your information. But I think it is very difficult. But I have to agree with you, Alom, to some extent, is that it's difficult, but we have an opportunity to do it, whereas a lot of people don't. And therefore, we have a responsibility to do it, And therefore, I'd like to invite you to definitely join the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain officially, and also be a vocal, member of that, because I understand, your problems with the term ex-Muslim. And I think Mina said it herself, and I've said it very often myself. I never called myself an ex-Muslim. This was not something I would ever define myself as. But the reality of the matter is, when you have a political movement that kills you for being an ex-Muslim, then you have to come out and say, I am an ex-Muslim, and I have a right to be an ex-Muslim. And I think if you're going to use the parallels of the gay movement, which we always do, is that your sexuality is your own business, but when you need to defend your sexuality and your right to be gay, you've got to come out and do it. It becomes a public challenge. It becomes a form of resistance. And that's why the Council of Ex-Muslims, the term ex-Muslim, is so important, and I think we need to take ownership of it, not because we want to create another group of ex-Muslims, a self-interested group, separate them from society. Now we want ex-Muslims also on the interfaith coalitions. In my opinion, get rid of interfaith coalitions. We don't need faith anywhere in public space. But it's not that sort of special interest group. It's a political challenge. It's a political movement. And I think in that sense, we need all of us. And I mentioned at the AGM that we had earlier on voting for our management committees during lunch, is I find this movement problematic in the sense that, the One Law for All campaign, Iran Solidarity, the anti-stoning campaign, they've all found so many activists, but the ex-Muslim movement hasn't, And I find that the ex-Muslim movement is very much, one in of itself. It's sort of looking for a family, a social network, and doesn't realize the importance of this political movement and this political challenge. And it's moving people who've come out on the forum, people who've come out on the websites and spoken out, like yourself, to join an organized movement. I think that is quite crucial. I also want to say, Sayed Jahiz is here. I'm sorry, I hope I say your name. Well, he started something which I think Hassan alludes to, the need for a practical sort of real community as opposed to a virtual one. And I think the London Meetup is a brilliant way of using the internet and starting from a couple of members to now having, 68 members in London where people meet regularly. And I think one of the things we had proposed is that the Council of Ex-Muslims would be willing to pay for the cost of meetup groups on site in various cities across the UK as a way of helping to push this sort of local community, because people do need that sort of support, and we need to give it. But I think we also need to organize much more vocally than we are, and people need to take that step forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maya. I'll just give the panel a chance to respond to some of those. I think the very first point was directed to you, Hassan, so would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, the psychological fear is enormous. I think most of the first people who leave Islam are usually the ones who perhaps were not very religious and who, for whatever reason, found it easier to do so. I think the reason why you haven't got more becoming active is because of the social pressure. They find it difficult. Even now, I mean, I left Islam in 2007, and I was very open about it. I've always worn my heart on my sleeve, and it's been a problem for me. But even now, my family is quite liberal, but even now it's very difficult for me. I still have problems from some members of my family, and they put pressure in a roundabout way. I had to remove my YouTube channel because of pressure put on somebody I love, not directly to me. And this is how this sort of pressure works, and the psychological pressure is always there as well. And as I say, I come from quite a fairly liberal family. A lot of the Asian community, majority of Muslims in this country come from Asian communities, and they are much more closely knit, much more greater pressure for them. So I think it's very, very hard for them. And I think if you were religious, especially, you've had that psychological pressure sort of drummed into you, and it is very difficult to get rid of.
Okay, thank you. A brief response from Anne-Marie.
No, I think I sort of come at this topic from a very sorry to say, a very Western viewpoint. But I can definitely relate to the going to hell thing, because I was raised a Catholic, not a very strict Catholic family, but I gave up believing in Catholicism a long, long time ago, and I still won't tell my mother that, by the way. And thankfully she doesn't look on One Law for All's website very much, so she still won't know. But I still won't tell her, and this is without the pressure of sort of the state telling you what to believe in. Because it would hurt her, I think, and I just don't see that. So I can really, really empathise with that. And the going to hell thing, that was the biggest thing to get over when I gave up the Catholic faith was, am I going to go to hell for doing this? But I got over it in the end.
I agree strongly with the need to mobilise, if you like, and one of the things I tried to do recently was there's an organisation a worldwide organisation now called Skeptics in the Pub, which some of you may or may not have heard of, and they meet regularly to discuss various issues, and a lot of them are atheists, and it's a massive movement with kind of thousands of people who go along to these events on a regular basis, and they have something called the Amazing Meeting, or TAM, which takes place in countries around the world. And I've been in touch with the organisers of some of these events, and I put the case to them that it was their responsibility to welcome ex-Muslims and to welcome skeptics and atheists from other cultural backgrounds, and a lot of them resisted that. And I got quite enraged about it. They said it wasn't their responsibility. And I actually think it is their responsibility. I think it's not just our responsibility. We're part of a bigger society. And it really deeply, deeply upsets me that there are powerful white skeptics, atheists, who refuse to acknowledge the issues that we have been discussing today. Because if they helped, it would help. And if they refuse to help, then it makes our job that much harder. However, the Skeptics in the Pub movement is one that we could perhaps emulate. So I've only been to one of the ex-Muslim meetups, and there was a few of us in a pub having a chat. But I suspect that perhaps if we modelled ourselves slightly closer on the Skeptics in the Pub, where we had a stronger organisation and a more organised structure, it might help to get more of us out of the woodwork. But I do think if there's any way we can, we have to form alliances with these other movements and really convince those in power in those movements that our struggle should become their struggle. And I have been deeply disappointed that some of the key people in those movements refuse to acknowledge that, but I'm still arguing with them.
Okay, thank you very much. Further contributions?